Well, hello, it's me, your boy Trent, back again. All right, here now. I know I have been missing in action for a while, but I have been working on my life. I have been minding my business. I have been dodging and surviving multiple pandemics. There's a lot happening in the world, but the fact is, I'm here and we get to enjoy each other's company. All right? In case you hear any weird noises, it's because I have on my air conditioned unit. The place is hot, and I am not trying to dead on the people on them YouTube. Trinidad is too hot. So if you hear a little buzzing, if you hear a little humming, is that. I know people tell me all the time they never hear what I reference, but just in case you could hear it, that's what's going on. And I also brought out this new mic setup. It's very different from me. It's very, very different. I have not used this type of setup since I had Trini Trent Radio, my podcast, years ago. But this is something new for me because my lapel mic that I used to run up underneath my clothes and clip on, it started electrocuting me. It started zapping me between my little chest hairs. I thought all the time it was a mosquito. But it wasn't that. It was the microphone itself. And one day I took off my shirt after I turned off my camera, because this is not OnlyFans, this is YouTube. I took off my camera, took off my shirt, and when I look on my chest, it was marked up like a coloring book. I said, something going on here. So I said, I'm going to take a little break. Then I gather myself, gather my thoughts, and I said, I'm going to try something new. And in the spirit of something new, we are here to discuss a brand new album. Well, at this point, it's not that new, but it's still new enough for me. And that is Beyonce's Renaissance. It is such an interesting project. This is an album that has so many layers, so many cultural references, so many things to discuss. So I have actually been living with this album, listening to it on my way to work, on my way home, listening to it while I exercise. I've discussed it on the phone with friends for hours and hours and hours. I've studied it. I've done research on it. And I've really sat with the record in such a way that I feel that I feel confident enough to have this type of conversation, but it's going to be long. There's a lot to get through. So instead of trying to pack everything into one video, what I'm going to do is split it up into like a series. You know, like how I did my Mariah Carey series. That's a shameless plug. I'm going to split this up into a series so that we can really dissect everything, peel each layer back, and have a fun and healthy conversation. Renaissance by Beyonce. I like how this microphone has my voice sounding very professional. Renaissance by Beyonce is really an ode to her Black queer fans. It's Black and gay, yes, because in many ways it is a tribute to her Uncle Johnny, who was a gay man who fought AIDS they had a battle with AIDS back in the 1990s. And he really put her on her musical path. He really inspired a lot of her ear for music and really helped to shape her career and her life. And she loved him so much. So this album, in its sense, is basically a tribute to him, but I also think it pays homage to Black queer culture in general. It's Black and gay, but it's also Black and femme. It's also Black and queer. And I make sure to include that word queer because I think it also speaks to the Black trans experience. You know, so much of the different sayings and the different cultural references that are included in this record, they come from ballroom. They come from the ballroom scene of North America, rooted in New York City. And Black trans women have been basically the foundation of the ballroom scene. And so many of the different sayings that have become part of pop culture today come from Black trans women, not just Black gay men. They come from all of the different people who are present in the scene. So that's why I label it Black and queer. What's interesting about Beyonce's journey, her musical journey, is that she has explored the Black diaspora at this amazing macro level. Like when you really look at her entire arc, going back to her debut album, starting with even right before, like with Work It Out, which was supposed to be the debut single, allegedly, and it didn't really pan out, so then she kind of switched gears for the album itself. When you really pay attention to that, you can see how she has basically traveled across the diaspora, starting in North America, exploring funk, exploring elements of disco, hip hop, R&B, soul, and then moving beyond that and going into other spaces. We've seen Beyonce go through the Caribbean. She's experimented with dancehall. She's brought in and experimented with reggaeton. She's even brought in reggae. And then she's gone to West Africa and explored Afrobeat and Afrobeats, two different things, and explored these different types of rhythms, these different sounds, these different melodies, and really found ways to incorporate it into her own sound as well as to immerse herself into those different cultural spaces. What Renaissance does is that it shows us Beyonce exploring a particular black space now at a micro level. She's really dived into a particular corner of the black experience and really brought in all of the different references and experiences that she's gathered as she traveled the different parts of the diaspora at a macro high level. So what we're seeing her now is by putting this album together, it has allowed her to explore intersections at this micro level. As I said earlier, this album is black and queer, it's black and gay, it's black and femme. These are all different intersections, and by femme I mean feminine, just in case my accent throwing you off. These are all different intersections. And I think a very good example of that is a particular song called Cozy. This is track 2. And what I love about this record is that we have the voice of T.S. Madison, who's a full-bodied black trans woman, as bold and as big as she wants to be. And I think that what Beyonce has done by including that sample of her talking about her blackness and owning it, I think it really speaks to the essence of the record. This is a woman who lives at so many different intersections. And as you listen to the song, you hear Beyonce talking about she's cozy. And this is really not about Beyonce saying, I'm cozy. It's about telling people to be cozy. That's the energy I get from this record. Because what she's doing here is saying to embrace your blackness, embrace your femininity, embrace your fatness. Just embrace all the different parts that make you you. And what she's also doing is exploring identity in an intra-group type of way. Like she's diving into particular groups within, the queer space. When I listen to a song like Pure Honey, and I listen to that record, not just because I love that song, I'm also in awe. I'm really, really enjoying the fact that she's highlighting 4 different types of black queer masculinity. At the very start of the record, we have the icon Kevin Jordan Zion Prodigy, who's a commentator from the ballroom scene, and he's also a Butch Queen Vogue Femme performer. And you actually see him, and he does dramatics. And you see him, you hear him at the start of the record, and he's telling you to, bring out the cunt. Now, for many people, they're probably saying, Trent, just say a bad word. Within queer spaces, the word cunt, it refers to femininity. It's about embrace your femininity. Are you soft? Are you feminine? He's calling for this at the very start of the record. And then you hear her transition into the sample of Cunty by Kevin Aviance, the legendary icon. Kevin Aviance, who's an icon in ballroom and also an icon in dance music and house music, one of the most successful dance artists ever on Billboard charts. We see Kevin Aviance come into the conversation with his sample of Cunty, and you actually hear him going, Cunty, Cunty. Now, Kevin Aviance, he is a drag performer. He's somebody who lives and exists between these spaces. He bends the idea of black masculinity. He bends it because he blurs those lines in such an amazing way. And then, of course, you have Moirene at the very end of the record, Miss Honey. Miss Honey. Every time I hear it, I laugh because that clip has been immortalized as a meme on Twitter for years. And it has been floating around YouTube for years. So the fact that she brought that in, this hyper feminine, campy type of masculinity mixed with femininity, it's very interesting to me. And of course, we can't overlook the 4th type of masculine performance, black queer masculine performance, which is the song Honey itself. To me, that is Prince down. And it references a very specific era in Prince's career, which is the turn of the 80s, the very early parts of his career as we transition from the 70s to the 80s, when Prince still had a poem. That is that era of Prince, just the way she sings it. And I think putting that sample with Cunty, putting that together with the Kevin Jordan Zion sample, the voiceover, the commentating, having Moirene all there, I think that was so very clever. And it really tells a story. It really highlights her intention here. Because Prince in himself, even though as his career progressed and he became more conservative over time, his gender performance, especially throughout the 80s, was quite queer. He was walking around in pumps, and he had his little S-curl and his assless chaps, and Prince is walking around in lace, and he's being hyper effeminate in many ways, but he's still masculine in his own grounding. So he's blurring the lines between the binary, between those 2 different corners that people, those of us who exist in a Western world and who conform to a binary, he's blurring those lines. And I think that is what she does throughout this record with those 4 different characters. And the thing about this album is that it's boldly queer. is not just one song. Beyonce made an entire album that speaks to the Black queer experience. Like, she really dives in and goes track by track by track. Yes, there are some pockets in there that may not necessarily be Black and queer, but the album in itself, the essence of the record, continues to celebrate and acknowledge a very particular type of lived experience. And this is very rare for a pop act, because I was sitting down thinking, how many times has this happened for a major pop artist? Because there are many Black queer artists out there. There are many artists who are allies and have been making records that acknowledge the existence of Black queer people. But when I think about a major pop act, like one of those big megawatt superstars, it's very rare that we see somebody on that level, that a Beyonce existing in that space, acknowledging Black queer people or acknowledging queerness, period, and doing so explicitly. I think about Diana Ross's I'm Coming Out, which is an anthem from the disco era, Nile Rodgers, and they put that record together. And that album, according to Nile Rodgers, was inspired when he went to a gay bar and he saw all these different gay men and drag performers paying homage to Diana Ross. And he came back and he said, we have to make a record that celebrates these people who love Diana Ross. And he wanted to make a record very similar to James Brown's, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. But he wanted to do that with a song for gay people. But the difference is that she didn't explicitly say on the record who the song was about. It could have been about Diana. She embraced it as about herself, and it could be for anybody. But it doesn't really speak directly to the Black queer experience or the queer experience, period. Then we have Madonna, who did Vogue. And when I think about Vogue, yes, Madonna included, the different performers from the ballroom scene. And yes, she shined a light on a space that for many people, had never been seen before. And yes, Madonna has done great work for queer people behind the scenes. But on the record and in the video, Madonna centers herself. She is at the center because, of course, she is the star. She centers herself, and even on the record, she doesn't even speak to those people. She talks about voguing and come on Vogue, let your body move with the music, but she doesn't speak to and acknowledge the Black queer people who are dancing around her on the record. So I think this is very interesting. But when I really think about it, I think about Janet Jackson. That is somebody who I think is probably the closest that we've gotten to what Beyonce has done. Because what Janet Jackson did is on songs like Free Zone, she acknowledges her gay fans and the experiences of gay people. You think of Throb, especially when she would perform it on tour, she would bring out her dancers and they would vogue, they would hit a dip. Or you think about a song like Together Again, which she wrote and she really put that record out to acknowledge the experiences of her Black queer people, her Black queer fans, a Black gay man who had died from AIDS. And she wanted to acknowledge that experience. But in that sense, those were one-off records that existed in pockets. Whereas Beyonce, she's made an all-in-one, like she just went all the way there on a full album. And this record, it acknowledges queerness not just in its lyrics, but also in the music, in the way the music is put together. You hear disco. Disco, I've always referred to disco as just camp R&B because it's R&B music at its foundation. But you add strings, you add horns, you add different types of percussion, orchestras, like a symphony of R&B. You add so many different things to the point that it has basically become R&B in drag. And then, of course, you have house music, which has been famously referred to as disco's revenge. After disco supposedly died, after, white people, white cisgender heterosexual men no longer wanted disco to be the dominant genre because they felt threatened by something that they could not control. That's just my perspective. Take it or leave it. But after disco supposedly died and it lost favor on the pop charts and on American radio, house music came to the forefront. And house is basically disco, but for a new generation. House came up and it took a new form. So you hear a lot of that on this album. And then, of course, you also hear rhythms that are very, very particular to the ballroom experience. There are certain beats that are moving through the music. And when you hear it, you instantly think, that's Vogue. That's ballroom. You almost want to hit a hand performance. You want to do a dip because it speaks to that experience so very clearly. And what Beyonce has shown by putting this album together is that she has really studied the culture. She has really taken the time to understand the culture that she's participating in. Because as you listen to the music and you listen to how it's all put together, it feels organic. There are certain beats that she's hitting on different records that she could only know where to take those breaths, where to take those pauses, when to go up, when to go down, when to pull back, when to ooze. The only way she can really figure that out is if she really sat and spoke to the right people, did the research, listened to the music, even watched YouTube clips, just to really understand the culture that she's referencing. I think a very good example of this is one of my favorite records on the album, and that's Thick. When you listen to Thick, there are points where Beyonce is singing and she takes pauses. And she'll even moan just a little bit. And my mind instantly goes to a very particular, a certain performer. It speaks to somebody who I watch all the time on YouTube. She's an icon in the boardroom scene, and her name is Sanaya. Sanaya Ebony. Sanaya Alaya, I think is her name right now, aka Sanaya Braxton, because she looks like one of the Braxton sisters. When I listen to that song, I think of Sanaya. There's actually a particular performance by Sanaya. I think it was 2017, somewhere around there at the Rumble Ball 83. She's in like a neon yellow top, some blue jeans, and some neon strap-up heels. Sanaya is even moaning just like how Beyonce is moaning on this record as she's rolling around on the floor, as she's doing her floor performance, as she's hitting her marks, as she's doing her steps. As I listen to Beyonce sing this record, I am thinking of Sanaya performing on that floor. And it's almost like you could put the video and the beat together and it will be perfectly in sync. And that lets me know that Beyonce really sat down. Like, I am willing to put $5 on the table, not a whole set of money, because, it's COVID time, prices in Trinidad going up, and I don't have all that kind of money to spend. But I would put $5 on the table and bet that Beyonce sat and watch people like Sanaya, watch people like Christina Richards, the icon, watch people like Alyssa La Perla, the icon, well, I think she's Alyssa Ebony now, people like Deja, the late great Deja, people like Mika, these different people, I bet Beyonce sat and watched them on the floor. Yes, I love watching people vogue. It's one of my favorite things to do on YouTube. I really like watching the girls vogue. I think it is such a fascinating thing. But I bet that Beyonce sat and watched them as she put her album together. And even the voices that she chose to sample. I mean, having Kevin Jordan Zion, having Kevin Aviance, having these voices on the record, to know where to put them, to know to open the track with Kevin Jordan Zion, to have him commentating and getting the girls hype as he does in a ball, and having, Kevin Aviance and have that cunty come through the record and have those beats hit at those exact times. She even had a crash in there. It's like she took the crash that people would normally dip on. She took the crash and she incorporated it into the music in such an interesting way. I think that really shows that this is somebody who sat down, and even if she didn't necessarily do it for herself, she had somebody sit there and teach her what was going on. She had the right team around her. It shows a level of appreciation, it shows a level of respect, and it shows a level of work that was done. And I think what Beyonce has also done with Renaissance is that she's really bridged the gap between Black queer spaces and the wider Black experience. Like, I'm hearing how she's connecting all of these different sounds together. Like, you're hearing the afrobeats, you're hearing the elements of reggaeton, you're hearing these familiar, wider Black rhythms, and you're hearing them being combined with disco and house and elements of dance, and all of these different things coming together in this amazing way. I think of the Big Freedia sample on Break My Soul, with that kind of New Orleans bounce energy, that fiery energy. And even the way she puts the album together, it's very hip-hop. I sat down and I was really thinking, she's using a lot of samples. And that is at the core of hip-hop music. My friend Ilikia, big up Ilikia, we were talking and having a big conversation about this. And Ilikia was the one who really highlighted that to me. She was like, this is so hip-hop. The way that she uses these samples and the way that she just ties everything together between Beyonce, the other writers, the producers, they've really combined all of these different things that normally wouldn't be so easily connected. And I also think about the presence of the great Grace Jones on the song Move, Move Out the Way, that record. How many times? My voice a little deep because it's cold. But I think about Grace's presence on this song because by including Grace Jones, especially with her bold Jamaican patois, she's not trying to put on like a transatlantic or American or any type of other accent. She's talking to you like a straight up Jamaican. Having Grace Jones open that record, you have the elements of afrobeats in there. You have Tems on the record. And of course, Grace in the way that she presents, her aesthetic is quite queer. She really shakes up and blurs the lines between the binaries. She goes beyond the boundaries of what people expect to be of femininity. Grace will present herself sometimes in a suit, or Grace will be super camp, or Grace will come out in the wildest makeup or body art. Grace does not conform to anybody's standard or idea of who she should be as a black woman. Grace shakes the table every single time. And I think that just bringing that together, all those different things I just mentioned, the Jamaican, the Afrobeats, Tems, Grace Jones, all of the different things coming together, the aesthetic, it really shows how Beyonce is combining and pulling these different things together. And I also think it's important that we acknowledge in this moment the album closer, Summer Renaissance. Well, if you're like me, you'd already have a final track. Yes, get to the end and you start all over. But anyway, Summer Renaissance, it really pays homage to Donna Summer. It pays homage to this woman who went beyond what people expected of her as a black artist. Donna Summer was one of the original pop stars. She's one of the original divas of pop. And Donna, she was this queen of just disco music, but she did so much more than just disco. And even the way she sang, the way she dressed, the way she performed, she didn't do anything in a conventional manner. She didn't stick into anybody else's rule book. She always went beyond. She tried to transcend what people expected of her as a black woman. And I think that Beyonce paying homage to her in this way on this track, it really speaks to what the album is about. It's about going beyond. It's about transcending a particular space. It's about acknowledging history and acknowledging culture, but also showing that we can be more. And I also think about the fact that, Summer Renaissance, it pays homage to disco music. It's a very clear disco reference because it samples Donna's I Feel Love. And I think with that disco reference, what she's also doing is acknowledging a generation of black queer people. Because think of all the black queer people who lived through the disco era, but did not get to live far beyond it because of the rise of HIV/AIDS. And I think by Beyonce making this record, having it be the closer, it's like a send-off to all those souls who didn't get to make it into the 90s or didn't get to make it to the new millennium. All those people who passed. It's as if Beyonce is acknowledging and celebrating that generation, as well as the people who have survived and are still here and is saying, this is a record for you. I felt like that was a very important statement. So not only is she reaching out to wider black spaces beyond black queer spaces, but she's also reaching through time. And the reason all of this works is because Beyonce, it just feels natural for her. It feels like there is a progression. So many artists, when they move through their careers, it's always this question of what do I do next? And how do I stay true to my sound and stay true to my fans? But you want to progress, you want to innovate. And some people do it brilliantly as they go from record to record to record. You can see an arc, you can see a growth. I think of people like Janet Jackson. I think of people like Michael Jackson. I think of people like McGill Mariah. I think of people like Mary J. Blige. You can see an arc, you can see as they progress through their careers. And then some people, they want to try all these different things and they start dotting around the map. And I think of Christina Aguilera as a perfect example of that. She has jumped all over the map. She has really tried all these different things as she tried to figure out how to reinvent herself with each new era. But the thing is, when you jump around the map and there isn't a clear connection between your albums, there isn't a clear through line, a clear thread, what that sometimes does is that you end up abandoning that part of your audience that you built with the previous album. Or there is no connection between your music, so you end up sometimes sounding a bit lost. As somebody would go back and listen to your catalog, you sound kind of scattered. And that sometimes happens to a lot of great artists. But I think what Beyonce has done from album 1 to now is progress in such an interesting way. Because as you listen to this record, you could hear how we got from her debut album, Dangerously in Love, to here. Because that first album, there were elements of funk and R&B and disco. They were all present. There was even a Donna Summer sample on that record when she did Naughty Girl. You hear where she sampled Love to Love You Baby. You hear the connections between those records. And then you could even go to B-Day and see the connection between B-Day and this, where B-Day, she was very hyper effeminate. She was camp in her aesthetic. She was over the top. There was an element of queerness to the music. And then you listen to even self-titled. I'm jumping forward. You go to self-titled and you hear a song like Partition and you hear Haunted. And you could hear the connection between those two records and Thick. Even 6-inch from Lemonade, you could hear the connection between that and Thick. The beats, the rhythms, that heavy bass. You can hear how this artist has progressed in a very incremental yet interesting way. So if I had to describe this album in one word, I would say it's intentional. Beyonce made very clear choices. She made very clever choices. She made a very clear roadmap for herself. And she worked with the right people, got the right references, did the work. As I said earlier, she studied to make a record that sounds cohesive. It flows. I mean, the way that it goes from track to track, sometimes you don't even realize the track has changed. You don't hear that line. You don't see the hemline. As old people will say, you can't see my hemline. You can't see the panty line. The tracks go from track to track so smoothly. And it's not just a sonic flow. It's the way the music just all flows together. Now, there's a van driving outside my house with a megaphone advertising something. I don't know if you will eventually hear it, but just in case you do, we just go and talk over it, all right? The thing about this album is that it's not entirely queer. There's a queer aesthetic throughout the record. There are connections and it's never completely lost. But there are some through lines on this record. There are some records that I think Beyonce, and this goes back to her being very intentional and very clear on how she was going to construct the album. There are moments on this record where she makes music that her non-queer or even queer people who are not very familiar with these type of sounds, these are songs that they could connect to. And I think of a song like Plastic Off the Sofa. That record which I call quiet funk. She's basically doing like a sing-along, like a duet with the bass line. That presence of the bass line makes it funk to me. And she's singing in a very structured, clear way that, if you're a fan of R&B and you're a fan of American soul, you can connect to this record. And it also is the slowest record as far as tempo on the album. She scales back on a lot of the wall of sound that she has to make it more sparse, to make it more easy on the ear. Something that if you're not into house music or dance music, this is something that you can groove with. And talking about groove, you come to Virgo's Groove, which is a very much a synth funk type of record. And then you go into something like Cuff It. Cuff It is also a record that if you're not a fan of the big sounds, this is a record that you can get into. And that strong hip-hop element in America has a problem. It has that 80s driving, that dun 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 dun. That it moves in such a way, but at the same time, there's almost more like an edge to it. Almost like, in my mind, goes into a more masculine sense. It's something that if you're not a fan of something like Thick or something like Pure Honey, when you hear this might be more something that will be your speed, because it really, it shows that she's trying to put like little boys in the water. Not boys as in little children. I'm talking about the floating boys. Little boys in the water, little lifelines, little through lines. There's something that people who are not fans of everything else can hold on to and can vibe with. And Beyonce is also being vocally intentional. As you listen to the record, you know that this is somebody who is making very clear choices about how she sings things. And that's because at the end of the day, Beyonce's voice has changed. And that's not a read, that's not shade. That's me simply saying Beyonce's voice has changed. She's gotten older. She pop out 3 children. At the end of the day, especially them twins, Beyonce's voice has gotten heavier. And now when I hear her go up, I can hear that there's more air, more rasp at the top. When you get to the end of Virgo's Groove and you hear her going up there, knowing Beyonce, it's by choice, because that is something that she's very clear on how she chooses to sing. And I've heard her sing similar to this before, like at the end of Check On It, that very airy, light part of doing those high riffs and runs. But as I listen to a lot of this album, I notice that when she goes up, there's always that bit of air. It's almost like a bit of rasp there. And I think it's because her voice has just changed with age. Not in a negative way. I actually think it's pretty. But I think that she's making clear choices because this is a record that she's going to have to perform. And let's say she performing one night and the backtrack are walking, because let's be clear, nobody performs like Beyonce and sings live 100%. Allegedly. Nobody ain't coming and sue me from Parkwood, eh? All right. But just in case the backtrack fail, or just in case the background singer and them say, oh, go on, Beyonce, we forgotten. You had to handle this whole set by yourself. If Beyonce has to sing this record, she can do that because she sings a lot of the records in the middle of her voice. This is something that I consider, listening to this, I don't feel like Beyonce is being challenged. She's not singing at the extremes, I should say, because she's probably is being challenged. But she's not at the extremes of her voice where you know, okay, she can't do this live. This gonna blow out her voice box. Or is she gonna sing this as had to be out of the first song or dead last after she take her intermission? Now you could listen to this record and you can tell, okay, this is a record that Beyonce could literally deliver in a live setting. What Beyonce did with Renaissance is create an album of celebration. She created an album that celebrates a particular community and that also celebrates the people who have been her fans for many years. People who, have always had to find a space in her music. You listen to something like Check on It, or you listen to something like Kitty Cat, or you listen to different songs from her career, and you kind of had to apply it to your own life, but you never really felt seen in the music. What Beyonce has done this time is she has shined a light on an entire group of people and said, no, this album is for you. And I feel that is very powerful. I'm shivering, just in case you can't see me shaking up. It's real cool. I complain about the heat now for a reason. But anyway, I think that what Beyonce has done is create an album of celebration for this particular group of people, but also for anybody who just wants to participate and enjoy the music. She really has released the wiggle. So what I want you to do now is subscribe to this channel. Subscribe, because I never know when I go pop back up. Anyway, I'm joking. Subscribe to the channel so you can see more of my review. And also express yourself, just as Beyonce said on the album, be yourself, express yourself. Nobody go judge you. Get in the comment section and let me know what you thought of the album. What are your thoughts? What are your general thoughts about Renaissance? How do you feel about the music? Did you enjoy it? Let me know and we'll have a great conversation. Anyway, I've reason and I'm hoping I don't catch no cold sitting down in this cold bedroom. All right? I'll go on.